Hi, Sundar.
Hi, sir. Hi, sir.
So each case will have a title like this here. So the title of the what they are presenting also comes in the introductory slide for you to know which they are presenting.
Okay.
Easier for you, sir.
So
we'll start on time. Arun, you will go first. Devigama ஆரம்பிச்சிரோம்.
Sure.
Arun, so you'll show anomalous RCA, I'll show anomalous left coronary. I've got another anomalous. In case you have not used the Ikari left, I'm showing how to use the Ikari left.
No, I didn't use your Ikari left and all.
Okay, so that I'll show, because that was a talk I gave in Gulf PCR. So it will be useful. So just to complement that, because I saw Arun's talk, I thought I'll complement and finish all the anomalous.
All the participants, we are going for live.
Okay.
I'm giving the countdown, then we go for live.
Okay.
Done.
All the participants, please mute the mic from your end. 3, 2, 1. We are live now.
Good evening, dear friends. Welcome to another webinar from MedEd Trust, and today on a lockdown after a long time, we are catching up, and we will have another MedEd Trust webinar. This time the topic is going to be complex coronary intervention conclave. We are having an array of cases, and today is a complete lockdown, and hopefully we have a lot of people attending the meeting, because I think people can't have much to do. So I should expect a better crowd this time, and to get on with the proceedings, we're going to have a variety of cases this time, and the cases are going to be handled by a variety of cardiologists, and we have a galaxy of interesting chairpersons. And to shape the future of medical education, which is the motto of MedEd Trust, I would first like to invite our chairpersons. I will be the MC for you, Dr. Prabhakar. Dr. ISM, very well known to all of us, Padma Shri, BC Roy awardee. I don't think I'll have to give a better introduction to him. He's a very, very academic, renowned interventional cardiologist from Apollo Hospitals. Next is going to be Dr. K. Chandrasekhar. He's a senior interventional cardiologist and electrophysiologist at Prashant Hospitals. Now, he's very well known. He's one of the very senior cardiologists from Chennai, and very popular. You ask anybody, they'll have only a good word about Dr. KC. He's very well known for his electrophysiology, but people don't know that he's a very good interventional cardiologist also. He doesn't talk much about interventional cardiology, but he's a very good interventional cardiologist also. Next is a very quiet operative who's going to be chairing along with us, is Dr. Rajendran. He's sitting in a very, very important place, Salem, in Kaveri Hospital, and very interested in primary PCIs and angioplasties and pacemakers. Now, with this short introduction, let me take you into the sessions, and Dr. Srini will be joining us later. I'll invite Professor ISM to invite Dr. Arun for the first presentation.
It is my great privilege and pleasure to invite Dr. Arun Prasad, who is Associate Professor of Cardiology at MGM Medical College and Research Institute at Pondicherry. And we have been seeing him presenting so many interesting interventional cases. Today I have got the opportunity and pleasure of listening to him personally. He did his DM from JIPMER Pondicherry. He has got a lot of awards and publications to his credit. Today he will be showing us an interesting case of double trouble, PCA and CTO of anomalous RCA. Without wasting much time, may I request Dr. Arun Prasad, please.
Arun, you can unmute yourself and start sharing. You're muted.
So click on the share screen button, green color tab.
The green share screen button.
First, you have to open the slide and click on
share screen and
the green color share screen button.
Yeah.
Select the slide and
I got it. So
yeah, you're there. Go for full screen mode.
Thank you for your kind words, sir. Today we will discuss about double trouble, the species of anomalous RCA, and it's a CTO case. So it's quite a simple case. It's not a very tough case. The tough cases will go with Karthik. So shall we start with simple case? He's a 66-year-old male. It's a case of chronic stable angina. A frail old gentleman, and is having angina refractory to medical management. His ECG doesn't show any resting ischemic changes. His echo showed concentric LVH with normal LV function. Actually, I did the angio of this fellow 1 year back in March 2020. And because of COVID, he didn't turn up. And after exactly 1 year later, he turned once again with the symptoms after stopping all the medications. So his angina was quite refractory to medical management, and we did a restudy and then proceeded this time. His coronary angiogram revealed LAD, which is free of disease, and D1 is a 95% lesion with small calibered vessel. RC is anomalous origin with CTO proximally. This is the RC CTO, and this is a LAO view, and it has favorable points like tapering end, and nipple is there, and that gave us much confidence. So we have to select the guide. It depends on anatomy of the anomalous RCA, and it depends on the location, configuration of the ostium, immediate takeoff angle, lesion location, tortuosity of the vessel, diameter of the aortic root, and porcelain aorta. So this is a common protocol we use in selecting a guide selection in anomalous RCA. So this patient has anomalous RCA arising from the right sinus itself and more towards midline and anterior. And you can see this is a dead lateral view, and this showed clearly it is more of anterior origin, and it has a tapering end and quite favorable. So with this, we have to categorize our patient. This patient, this is in the sinotubular plane. It's not a high takeoff or low takeoff. It's in the midline and anterior. It's near the midline, and it's categorized into RC. So this is a sinotubular plane, and it's falling inside the plane, and it's quite anterior. So this is a small, this is a study, and it says anomalous RCA from right coronary sinus. We have here it is type C. So guide catheter selection. We have to choose between JL or because of the down facing. Initially we thought we will go with the JR and 4. And if not supporting, then we'll go for AR type of guide. And this is the first shot. We went by femoral with this JR4, and this guide definitely gave a good support. We didn't have any problem with this guide. And with microcatheter support, with Fielder STR, we could cross the lesion within 10 minutes. So this is a Fielder STR with microcatheter support. Then we pre-dilated with the 2x12 NC truck. This is after post balloon. It's a distally very underfilled vessel with a quite negative remodeling. So the wire is exchanged from the microcatheter with the workhorse wire, the cyan blue we exchanged. Then we deployed the distal stent, that is 2.5 into 32. The LAO cranial view. After deploying distal stent, we dilated the ostium of the deployed stent with the stent balloon. The proximal stent is 2.75 into 32, and with a good post dilatation, this is a final result we could have. So it's a though it's an anomalous origin, the CTO both was quite favorable, the JR4 guide gave good support, and since its JCTO score was 0, we could easily do this case. So the take-home message is anomalous origin of RCA is not uncommon. Anomalous origin from right coronary sinus is quite difficult because the catheter, the guide catheter, cannot sit and give a support from the backside, and the secondary curve also will not help in this case. Good guide support is a key for complex intervention. Adjuvant accessories are mandatory for successful intervention. If failed, if guideliner and something like that, failing to plan prior is planning to fail at the end. Thank you.
Arun, you can go back to your interesting slide, the one how you classified this thing. That was probably a very useful slide. Probably go to that and Prayesan sir.
Yeah, I think so. Can you show that
Yeah.
outer diagrammatic, no?
Yeah.
Yes.
You can probably give another word about this, because I think this is the most informative part of the presentation. Go ahead.
So this is the LAO view, and this central midpoint is the hypothetical plane which divides a right and left sinus, and anything very high takeoff is AO, and it is a sinotubular plane. This is a right coronary artery which is normally supposed to originate here. This is a left coronary artery, and A usually represents high takeoff, that's above the sinotubular plane but near the sinus. B usually represents a low takeoff, that's below the sinotubular plane. So anomalous RCA that is originating from the left coronary sinus can be high takeoff or low takeoff. Right coronary sinus can be high takeoff or low takeoff. And anything which comes in the midline, near the midline, is RC. It's quite rare to have D, that's exactly from the midline. And if anything is come from the right sinus near the midline, it's RC. Anything arises from the left sinus near the midline is LC. So then in the RC we have either anterior or posterior. Even lateral view will definitely say the anterior or posterior origin of the vessel. So the guide selection depends on whether it is arising from high takeoff or low takeoff or near the midline. So RC arising from non-coronary sinus is quite rare. So this is basically a study which gives what guide to choose. This is the anomalous RCA arising from right coronary sinus. If it is a type A, that is a right coronary sinus, is a high takeoff, then the approach, radial approach or femoral approach, common guide catheters. If it is a upward takeoff, then AL1. It's a down slanting, it is MPA. If not, AR1. A horizontal takeoff usually will go well with a JR 3.5. JR. This is a type A. And if it is a type C, this is in our case where it is arising near the midline, then the guide catheter option will be either JR4 or MPA. We didn't have MPA, and if JR4 is not sitting in this case, then we have to go for AR1 because it is a downward facing the lesion.
Your hypothetical RCA LCA line that you draw, when it is anomalous, how does it apply? Go back to your previous
slide. The line is in the LAO view, sir. It will differentiate.
Go back 2 slides. You don't have this. You don't have the 2 coronary arteries. The right is anomalous. So you are drawing a line between the 2 sinuses and saying above and below, between the 2 origins of coronary arteries. Now this is going to be.
This is what normal is supposed to be. This right and left is supposed to be normal. This is in LAO view. This is where the right should arise, but anomalously it is arising somewhere in A, B, or C.
So it is more from the left. You draw a line more or less, let's say about 30 degrees down, and expect where you expect the right coronary artery and take it over below. That's all it is. It's not 2 sinuses going together. ISM sir, anything you want to add, sir?
If the aortic root is quite enlarged because of chronic hypertension, again it will become difficult. Whatever the guideline whatever the flow chart you have shown.
Yeah.
And many of the times we hook with multi-purpose.
Yes, sir. Multi-purpose is definitely a good option even in this case.
Any more questions from the panelists or chairpersons, please? It is a very good case and very simple, and really day to day it is teaching for the upcoming cardiologists. Very interesting. Dr. Chandrasekhar sir, any comments? Sir, you have to unmute yourself, Dr. Chandrasekhar. Okay.
What is the workhorse wire, guide wire you use in CTO commonly? Fielded XCR or fielded XC or?
If the actually this case from the retrograde injection we came to the conclusion it's a short segment CTO, and there is a tapering end which a lead point is there. So STR is if there is a tapering end and some joint filling is there, STR will easily cross. That's the reason we have chosen STR here, fielded STR here. With my
I think most of us use that only when we use CTO. Only one thing, there is a branch coming just
above,
above the.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions?
And no further questions. I think we will proceed with the next presentation, and I think the next one is going to be from Arun's very close friend, Dr. Casey, sir. Could you introduce?
Yeah. So next, I think first of all, I want to thank Media Trust and Abad for this opportunity. And I've got great pleasure in introducing Dr. Karthikeyan. And he is a very senior consultant and interventional cardiologist from Hindu Mission Hospital. And he is very good operator, and I've seen him on so many occasions in interventional meetings. And he's going to talk to us on dual challenge, that is CTO, LAD, and left main coronary artery intervention in anomalously originating left main coronary artery from posterior sinus. Dr. Karthikeyan, please.
Thank you very much, sir, for the kind words. I want to share my screen. Yeah, I can share it now. Can you see my slides now?
Yeah. Yes, you can go ahead.
Slideshow.
Yeah. So I'm going to show something complementary to what Arun showed today. So the twin challenge, I don't see it as trouble with the twin challenge, a CTO intervention in LAD in an anomalously originating left main. So I had to do both the left main and LAD. So I'll just go to the case fast. The 48-year-old well-built male patient presented with heart failure, risk factors being diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and the angiogram done after medical stabilization showed a double vessel disease, and did the viability study, and it found that the L6 territory was not viable. So the PTCA was done 5 years back now. So this is the diagnostic angiogram. So you can see that the left main is long, and you can see CTOs in both LAD and LCX. And traditionally, we are taught that if the left main is long, then look for an anomalous circumflex. But here, the circumflex is originating normally. So it's just that the origin of the left main is in an abnormal sinus. So, and maneuvering the Tiger was not that difficult. So the Tiger guide was used to complete the study. So I'll just show you something. Yeah, okay. The RCA is here, and I did a conus shot because traditionally it's told not to take injections. But then I wanted to know, what's keeping the LAD viable, and whether we have, visualization of the LAD. So this is what we saw from the conus angiogram. So the heart team discussion was done, and the idea my surgeon turned down because he was not able to see the distality of the vessels. So we thought we'll do a viability guided endovascular intervention. So the PTCA, always I believe that there is only one rate limiting step in any intervention. So this, I took two axes, one radial, one femoral. The radial was 6 French and the femoral was 7. And I try as I might, I was not able to engage the left from the femoral approach. So in desperation, I went to the radial and chose the right femoral axis for giving me the retrograde shots. So this is the tiger guiding. You can see that on the left side there is nothing, and I'm able to go close to the origin with the tiger guiding, but then I'm not able to get any support. So now what I did is I went, traditionally, the mother of all guide catheters is the Amplans one. So I just took the Amplans one from the radial approach, and with little bit of maneuvering, I was able to get in. So the right coronary shot is being given from the JR from the femoral approach. So now you can see the problem. The Amplans, how it is engaged, the left coronary is actually a little bit seeing downwards. And so now what I did, I put an anchor wire into the circumflex and a traditional workhorse wire into the LAD. And because this traditional workhorse wire will be the railroad on which the any microcatheter is going to go, and the CTO wire is going to handle only the CTO. Because when you are going to use a CTO wire from the origin, then you have to make different bends, and it won't be good to tackle the CTO. So this is, let me go to the next slide, please. Okay. So now what I have done is the fine cross has come into play, and this is a step which I would not do now. But 5 years before, I did this, trying to see whether there's any micro channel with the fine cross. Because the idea is, a dye is liquid and it's difficult to control dye. So this is a step which I would not do now. But, younger days I did it, and I could see a small channel. And so this was the, now it makes things easy that I'm going to work intra-plaque and try to, get in through one of these channels and do an antegrade work. So now the Fielder XT didn't create much progress. It went, but then at some point it, could not do the job what I wanted. So I started doing intentional wiring with the Gaia first, and then the Gaia first entered into a small branch. And then with the retrograde contralateral injection, we could show that the wire was in the true lumen. So I exchanged to a traditional workhorse wire, and the procedure was then more or less traditional. I used a 1.25 and a 2.5 balloon to prepare the lesion. And this is maybe a little controversial, but see, what I thought at that time, we didn't have IVUS, and see, the proximal LAD is never a small vessel. So the distal stent was sized at 3 millimeters with a nominal pressure deployment of platinum chromium stent. And the proximal stent, the left main into LAD, because you can see that the distal left main and the LAD is also deceased. And so I thought I will leave the normal first 10 millimeters of the anomalous left main and then do a crossover stenting into the LAD. So this is what I did. So you can see the different views of the stent implantation, and then a post-dilatation with 4 millimeter balloon. This was also provisionally sized because I thought no left main is less than 4, so 4 and up to 25, 26 atmospheres. So I think it went up to 4.5. So this is the check angiogram post procedure, and you can see that the septals have opened. It's a chronically underfilled vessel, and even after giving nitro, this is what I got. The good part was, most of the branches have opened up, and it looks reasonable for from where we started. So this is the summary. I think I've summarized everything. So let me go to the next slide. The case at this point, I wanted to highlight the anomalous left coronary artery from high posterior, the part of sinus, and the CTO of the LAD and LMCA. And of course, the loose tissue tracking was what I chose, and how the double and selective injection made my life easier. And radial approach can still be used, sometimes in anomalous arteries. Radial approach gives you better support than what we could get from femoral. And this is in 2017. This patient was admitted for a lower respiratory tract infection when the CT chest was done. At that time, I got his CT of the coronary is also done, and I can show you the origin of the. You can see here. This is the origin of the left main, which is originating posteriorly and also high. This is where the left main is originating, and I think you can. Okay, I'll go back. And you can see the slide here where you can see the reconstruction where the LAD is, left main is originating high. And so this is the patient. I took him up for check angiogram 3 years later in 2018 February, and the result looks pleasing. And I would like to draw your attention to the circumflex, which was also closed. I don't know what happened, but you know, the circumflex is also flowing now, and you can see that the chronically underfilled vessel has now grown, and the sizing of 3 is very appropriate for this vessel. And so this is it. So my lessons I learned from this patient was viability assessment to guide revascularization strategy, so that the targeted effort can be made for the territory which requires it, and then the target vessel will grow after revascularization with appropriately sized stent. So the poor target may be due to an underfilled vessel, so don't give up on the LAD and have interventional optimism. And then pre-procedure CT and intra-procedure imaging would have saved a lot of time, and so it's, I think, better to do that when you are dealing with a complex intervention. And now we have a slender sheet, so you can use the 7 French guiding even from the radial approach. So the wire control hinges on good guide support. Good guide support with a microcatheter will make your wire, you can control the wire. Otherwise, it will be difficult to control your wire. You end up dissecting, and then the procedure is going to be prematurely stopped. And aggressive risk factor modification, lifestyle change. This patient was very motivated. He did his part of the job, and I'm happy to do my part of the job. So I think this is a case I wanted to show just to you know, have a very optimistic outlook in these bad times. I just wanted to complement what Arun showed, because in anomalous arteries of the arising from the left sinus, the RCA arising from the left sinus, there are difficult engagement. Actually, now this is how the JL engages. This is how the AL engages. And I find that the Ikari left, I have now a series of 6 cases where the Ikari left has been used for anomalous RCA. This type A and B, which Arun had clearly told us about. Now we can see that how the Ikari left gives you that extra backup because of its tertiary curve. It's basically a traditional JL with a little bit modification done for the radial approach. The brachial curve is added, and the length between the primary and secondary curve is longer. So now this is how you get a power position. This position, if you can get, is quite good for any intervention. This is the way you have to go over a balloon and then get your guide in, so that you get very good power position. And this was a direct stenting. I showed this in Gulf PCR, that was in December 2015, and this was a direct stenting done. And so this is just to show anomalous origin from the left sinus of an RCA. And this is the diagram which Arun had shown. This is a traditional taken from Annapurna Kini and Samin Sharma's paper way back in the early 90s. And they have given all the possible origins and the possible choices for an anomalous right coronary artery. I have this picture stuck on my cath lab wall. So any anomalous artery, we just go to the thing. But in my personal experience, what I do is for an anomalous RCA arising from the left sinus, it's usually the Ikari left. And any other origin, it's the short implants left, 0.75 or 1, which does the job most of the time. And of course, you can use the other catheters also, but I find the short implants left very useful, especially from the radial approach, to get to all the anomalous arteries. Now we have a series of 16 cases where all the variable options have used Ikari left. I've used this is 3-dimensional right curve of cordis, then short implants left 1.75, and the traditional AL1 and multipurpose. So it works most of the time. You are able to get into the anomalous right coronary arteries. And approach, I personally prefer radial approach because it gives me the leverage. I'll tell you why. Because in the femoral approach, what happens? The guide lands in the non-coronary sinus. So in traditionally, when the RCA arises from the right sinus, that is easy to maneuver. Whereas when the RCA is arising from somewhere close to the non-coronary sinus, it's difficult to maneuver. Whereas the radial approach, what happens is the guide lands into the right coronary sinus, and from there you have the length to maneuver. So radial approach may be useful when you want to do anomalous right coronary interventions. So I think thank you very much for your patient listening, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Great work, Dr. Karthikeyan. Excellent cases, and you have done a very good job in tackling both the complex cases and made looks very simple. I think I have seen this first case in some other meeting. I think it was a very nice case, and actually the anomalous origin of coronary artery, usually that the coronary artery arising from the opposite sinus is very common. No, that is left coronary sinus arising from the right sinus, or the right coronary arising from the left sinus. But this is a rare anomaly.
This is the rarest coronary anomaly for the left coronary. This is the rarest coronary anomaly, sir.
Yeah. And you have shown a very good case of anomalous right coronary artery using the Ikari left, and how you engage and do the plasty successfully. Excellent work.
A trial and error, sir. Actually, I used 6 guide catheters that day, and I just recorded it so that many of the meetings, whenever I show anomalous, I show all the ways coronary artery can be engaged. Because then we have a picture in our mind how, in fact, last week I had done anomalous type C coronary artery, where we did with SAL1. After trying with the no torque, that is a 3-dimensional right curve, it didn't work, and then with the JR it didn't work, then I used the SAL1. Traditionally, we have always been taught to avoid the implants because of the aggressiveness of the catheter. But then, as we see more anomalous arteries and more complex intervention, then implants should be a part of our armory and should not be hesitate to take the implants catheter. If you are very worried about the aggressiveness, I think the short-tipped implants is available with Medtronic. I think will do the job most of the time.
Now, how comfortable are you with multi-purpose guide catheter?
I'm comfortable. So say any guide which can be pulled and pushed, we are comfortable.
I think especially implants and multi-purpose, we should be very careful.
The implants should be very careful when we use engage the artery like the traditional way, that is taking support from the aortic sinus. Only then it should not be pulled. If you are going to engage the implants from above, then what happens is it behaves like a multi-purpose only. So you can maneuver it. But always maneuvering an implant is better to do it over a balloon. Have the balloon rail between the ostium and the guide catheter. Then you can maneuver the implants a little bit more safely. And removing the implants also, if you have to engage it from above, then you have to only pull it. If you push it, it's going to go in only. So what you have to do, you have to keep the balloon across the ostium and the guide, and then using that railroad, giving a contrast injection using the Newton's third law as a thing to back the catheter out, then you have to remove it. So that always we have traditionally thought about pushing and rotating. That is when you use the implants traditionally, like engaging it from the sinus. When you are engaging it from above, you have to do this technique to remove.
Good technique.
Sir, I have one question, sir. Sir, do you by default choose radial approach for anomalous interventions?
Yes, sir.
Because sometimes you may have to end up with debulking strategies.
See, it all depends, sir. If I have to plan anything 7 French, I look at the radial artery size of the patient. It's very easy to go and have a look, with a vascular probe. If the radial artery is good, then I don't mind even taking 7 French from the radial artery. The slender sheath is available. But if at all I'm going to do something, prolonged procedure, as you said, debulking, then femoral approach works fine. And we do it. I'm not averse to using femoral approach, but for anomalous arteries, I just believe that due to the anatomy, that the radial approach offers an easy way of, the radiation time spent in engaging the artery gets minimized. And you have 2 approaches. If you are going to do, if you want backup, you can even go from the left radial approach. It gives you a very nice opposite wall backup also. So most of my anomalous arteries, my default approach is radial only. And my femoral is less than 5% of my work.
That's fine, sir. Even for both sides.
Yes.
Even the left side as left side.
For me, I have 4 accesses. Actually, I do both radial, ulnar. It doesn't matter. I just see the whichever artery is, I feel the pulse better, and I go. In fact, ulnar artery is even more, acceptable. I'll tell you, because the artery is larger, it's less prone to spasm, and it's a more straighter artery. So sometimes, ulnar artery also helps. doing a complex intervention.
How often you use imaging while doing the PCI?
Sir,
Either OCT or IVUS, you are
sir,
always using?
I have in-house IVUS, sir.
IVUS,
so yes, 20% of my cases are imaging guided.
Okay.
Because of the cost and everything, really I have to see whether it's a class 1 indication. So 20% of my cases are imaging guided.
And what hardware, what type of hardware you use? Is it all N guide catheter, guide wire, or Oxford?
No, sir. I prefer to use Newark all the time. For one
especially radial,
Yes, because ETO is one of the biggest cause of spasm.
I know, correct.
So it's a small amount. I think we can always make the patient bear it. In fact, it is factored into our package, so it's always Newark all the time.
Yeah, better. Especially when you're doing complex PCI, better to use always new guide catheter, new guide wire, everything.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
In fact, anomalous RCA or anomalous origin of RCA is more commonly many people use guidezilla or guideliner.
Yes.
Because it's very difficult to track a stent, particularly long stent.
Yes.
And I think the key of success in anomalous origin is the selecting a proper guide. That is the key in success. And once the guide is there, I think the things are conventional as usual.
The thing is, for each anomalous artery, there is a power position. And see, the guidezilla gives you it makes you take a power position with ease, with the guides sitting outside. But then that is a very aggressive positioning. But if we can plan ahead, as I told you, if you use the Ikari left for the left-sided RCAs and short implants left, and then over the balloon, little bit of good power positioning, I think most of the time we are able to deliver stents. Of course, the guideliner is a good addition, but then we have to remember that all maneuvers over the guideliner have to be done over the balloon, and the inching method has to be used. And taking out when we use a guideliner, we end up traumatizing a little bit more area. So what happens is the stent also tends to become longer.
I think that was two very good anomalous cases that we had discussion, one on the right and one on the left. And I think that the model, I think both of them gave us very, very clear selection of your guide catheter and very good guide support. That I think is the key to your intervention. Radial or femoral, it's your comfort zone. And ulnar is a very good choice. Only thing, ulnar is a deeper vessel, so you have to get used to getting the ulnar. But if you keep doing ulnar, it is fairly all right. So it shouldn't be a problem. And if you think that your support is going to be better femoral-like, you can go to the left radial also. So that also gives you something like a femoral approach, so you can get a good approach there also. I think very good lessons from all of us. I think all the youngsters who have been listening to it would have benefited a lot. Now I think Dr. Srini is there. I think we should be able to get in Srini next. And I'd like to invite Dr. Rajendran to invite Dr. Srinivasan for his presentation.
Dr. Srinivasan is a very famous and eminent cardiologist in Apollo Hospital. And to his credit, he has attended many conferences and seminars, and to his capacity, he got many medals, and his articles appeared in many scientific international journals. And over to Dr. Srinivasan.
Teachers, friends, and colleagues, thanks for the
Maybe you're not very clear. Your audio is not very loud.
Okay. Okay. And just
Konja, got to be a little louder.
Yeah, sure. I'm in the hospital now. Am I audible now?
Yeah, better.
Okay, next 20 minutes or so, we are going to just see. I'm going to run through what is the latest advances in the OCT imaging. So this is a patient who has triple vessel disease, and you can see here is the right coronary angiogram.
Hey, your presentation is not seen. You have to start sharing.
Okay, sorry.
Your voice also has to be loud.
Sure.
Shout like you're wearing a mask and wearing a face shield. Now that with all this used to us, I think we have learned to shout.
I'm just showing my slide.
Yeah, we can see your slides. Go to full screen mode. I think we are good.
So this is the case, triple vessel disease. The syntax score is 22, and where now you have an option of both CABG versus PCI, and you can see here the both options are there. So the patient was given both options. Patient chose for PCI, and this is the right coronary angiography. You can see that. You can see the mid-segment RCA, then circumflex, you can see again there is a bifurcation lesion, and the LAD, there is proximal LAD lesion. So obviously it's a triple vessel disease, and when you do the syntax score, it comes to 22. So both options are given, CABG versus PCI, both are equal, and patient elected for PCI. So whenever we go for such complex multi-vessel PCI, it is always better to do pre and post imaging, which will improve the enable us to do a better job at the end of the day. So when you take OCT, so first you have to set the OCT. So these are the 4 steps: connect the syringe, perch the catheter, thread the dock, and connect the catheter. So first, what we have to do is, once you connect everything assembled, then you have to look for this 4 piece. First, make sure that the lens is distal to the lesion, interest lesion. That is catheter distal to the lesion. Then just perch the central lumen, catheter lumen. Then puff the, make sure that the guiding is coaxial. So puff to evaluate the clearance of dye. Then pull back image accretion. So you have to see that the pullback is coming properly. So that is how the pullback comes. So when you do the pullback, you have 2 modes. I think one is called survey mode accretion, which is about 75 millimeters you are covering, and the speed is 2.1 seconds it will finish, and 5 frames per millimeter. And then high resolution accretion, it covers about 54 millimeter in 3 seconds. Little longer it takes, because the high resolution, it takes 10 frames per millimeter, so that we'll have a better resolution, which will help, especially in patients who is having bifurcation lesions, where we deal with bifurcation, recrossing the wire, and stent fracture assessment is better with high resolution accretion. And this again, now to emphasize the modes, high resolution covers 54 millimeter, survey mode covers 75 millimeter. And here you can see that, from the monorail tip, you have the lens, and from the lens, you have the proximal marker, and that is how the measurement goes on. And here is the user interface, where you can see there are 3 views. I mean, one is the cross-sectional, another one is the L view, or the longitudinal mode, and the central portion is the luminogram. That's the 3-dimensional view. So here what we can do, we can assess the area measurement, we can do the length measurement, and we can type the text, and we can zoom in, zoom out, and we can delete whatever. So these are the things which we can do in the user interface. So getting to the subject proper, pre-PCI OCT, MLD, and post-PCI OCT, MAX. So MLD max, this is the algorithm, new algorithm. So pre-PCI OCT can be used to assess the morphology of the lesion, to assess the length, and to make sure what is the diameter of the vessel which we are dealing, so that it will enable us to properly choose the stent and deploy it. So pre-PCI OCT guidance, first we will see the morphology, then length, diameter. Here is the LAD lesion you are seeing. Let's get into the morphology. Normal artery morphology, you have edema, you have internal elastic lamina, then you have media, then external elastic lamina, then adventitia. So what happens in OCT? You can see the same thing. You can see that there is intima is there, then there is internal elastic lamina, then you have the media, that's the darker portion, then again when it ends, it becomes the external elastic lamina, then you have the brighter portion again, the adventitia. So this is the three-layered structure. That's what we expect in a normal vessel. So whenever you see a OCT image where if you are able to see the external elastic lamina and adventitia clearly, then it can be of two possibility. One is either it's a normal or you have a fibrous plaque. If you are not able to visualize the external elastic lamina clearly, then you have to look for two things. If it is within the lumen, then whether it is high attenuated or low attenuated. If it is high attenuated, that means you are not able to see beyond the whatever structure you are visualizing in the lumen. Beyond that, you are not able to see anything. So it is attenuated, completely high attenuated, then it is red thrombus. Intralumen, if it is, you are able to see beyond what is there in the lumen, and then that is called low attenuated, that is white thrombus. Similarly, within the vesical wall, if you have high attenuation, then it is lipid plaque, and if you have low attenuation, it is calcium. So if you are able to draw a line, clear-cut line, then it is calcium or white thrombus. So this is again now it highlights high attenuation. What do you mean by high attenuation? So obviously there is nothing seen beyond the black portion. So it is completely attenuated. So either in the lumen it is red thrombus, in the vessel wall it is lipid plaque, and when it is low attenuation in the lumen it is white thrombus, in the vessel wall it is calcium. So you'll be able to clearly demarcate. And this is the external elastic lamina adventitia are visualized very clearly here. And so this is normal vessel. And this is the patient with the fibrous plaque. You can see here nicely you can see that the media is there and there is a fibrous plaque here. And here you can see the lipid plaque, because you are not able to see the completely, it is highly attenuated, so you are not able to see the external lamina or adventitia here, and it is in the vessel wall, so it becomes lipid plaque, and you cannot clearly demarcate the plaque. But on the other hand, you can see here, it is also clearly demarcated vessel wall, and you are able to see a clear-cut demarcation, and you are able to see the vessel beyond the plaque. So this is calcium, and it is clearly demarcated, and you are able to see the vessel. So it's low attenuated, and in the vessel wall, it's clear demarcation. And again, in the lumen, you are able to see a red thrombus, a thrombus there in the lumen, and beyond that thrombus, you are not able to see anything in the vessel. So it is high attenuated. On the other hand, here you can see a white thrombus where you are able to see the vessel. So this is how we clearly differentiate the plaque morphology with the OCT picture. So morphology rated lesion preparation. So by knowing the morphology, you can prepare which balloon, whether you want to go for direct stenting, or you want to take a complaint balloon or an NC balloon, or you have to use something like a rota or a therectomy device or IVL. So here you can see a lipid plaque predominantly, so you can go for direct stenting. You have fibrotic, then you can do a complaint balloon dilatation. When you have a mild to moderate calcium, go for NC balloon, and when you have severe calcium, go for a therectomy devices or IVL. Influence of calcium on the stent expansion. You can see when you have more the calcium, obviously your stent expansion is going to be less. So you can score the calcium by OCT, and here you have the angulation. So how much it occupies in the circumference, how much it occupies, 90 degrees or 90 to 180 degrees or more than 180, depending upon 0, 1, 2 point. And the thickness, how much thickness the calcium is occupying, whether it is 0.5 millimeter or less. If it is 0 point, more than 0.5, you have to give 1 point. And what is the length of the calcium? So if it is less than 5 millimeter or 5 millimeter, 0 point, more than 5 millimeter, 1 point. So to maximum you can have 4 points, and minimum you can have 0 points. So more the points, the chances of with direct stenting getting success is less, because the expansion will be a problem. So rule of 5 is 0.5 millimeter thickness, 5 millimeter length, and 50 meter vessel, 50% vessel arc. That is the rule of 5. So calcium dependent. So once you see the calcium, you can better prepare the lesion so that you will have a better success at the end. So what you are putting an NC balloon and trying and seeing if it is not working, then you go for rota and see, then you can go for IVL. So whichever works you can take. So this is how atherectomy reduces the thickness. Once you do the atherectomy, you are breaking the calcium, then you go for better post dilatation. Then you stent it, and then you will get a better expansion. So more than 100%. So you are able to get a better expansion. So morphology assessment by OCT helps you in planning your strategy better. So this is how the morphology assessment, whether it is a normal vessel and fibrous plaque, then calcium, what is the severity of calcium you are. Second is MLD. So next is length. So length of the lesion. So you can make sure that whenever we want to position the stent, we want to position it from normal to normal segment. So by OCT, wherever you are able to see the 3-layer structure, then you should try to position it. So you can see here, you can assess the length of the lesion. This is the luminogram 3-dimensional view, and here you can see that scroll the reference vessel markers to distal normal OCT luminogram first. Then you choose what is the distal safe area to land the stent. Then you go proximally and try to choose this is the proximal area to position it. So, and once then you measure the length, and then whatever stent which is available, and close to that length you have to choose the stent. Like you have 33, then you have 38 only we have in the distance. So if you get 40, then you go for 38 mm, or if you get 35, then you go for 33 millimeter stent. So you choose the stent accordingly. So proximal where you want to choose, distal where you want to choose, you are selecting. Then adjust the lens to the available DES in your track. The more normal reference you have to choose. So that's the. So here you can see that it comes to about MLA 1.53 and 86.7% is the area, and the length 37 millimeter. So and so finally, they choose 33 millimeter. The stent is available, so they choose 30 millimeter. So this is close to that. That is how here we're deciding. So down is the longitudinal view, upper is the cross view, and middle is the luminogram 3-dimensional view. So you can choose the proximal end and distal end, and then you measure the length of the lesion. Then that is the relatively 3-dimensional, 3-layered structure. You are able to see in the OCT. You choose that area for landing, and then you see your rack which is close to the stent D is available, like 33 millimeter in this case. So you are decided to 33 millimeter. The third thing is diameter. The diameter of the vessel. So you can measure the diameter of the vessel in the cross-sectional view, and you can see here that's how you have to measure. So once you measure from the external elastic lamina to the opposite external elastic lamina, you can measure. And if you are able to see the external elastic lamina, by chance, if you are not able to see the 3-layer structure and you are forced to measure, then you have to go for the measurement of the mean lumen diameter rounded up to 0.25 to 0.5 millimeter. That is, the mean lumen diameter is calculated, then you round it up to 0.25 to 0.5 millimeter. This is how you have to choose the balloon for 3 pre-dilatation and post-dilatation. So this is how, if you are able to see the EEL to EL, you are able to clearly calculate the cross-sectional area and the diameter of the vessel, you will get it. And suppose if at the LAD distal reference, the vessel wall can be measured, it's fine. The mean EEL is 3.0. So it round down to nearest stent size is 3 millimeter. But suppose if your vessel is LAD proximal reference vessel can be measured, EEL is 4.36. It's round down to nearest balloon size for post dilatation is 4 millimeter. That is 4.36 is the proximal reference. Then post dilatation balloon you can come close to the 4.4 millimeter. So at the LAD proximal reference, if the vessel reference, if the vessel wall cannot be measured, then MLD 3.0 millimeter. Round up to nearest balloon size for full dilatation 3.5 millimeter. So this is how the diameter assessment helps for deciding the stent size and the post dilatation balloon. So once this is how the pre-PCI OCT helps, then the post-PCI, after deploying the stent, PCI, the OCT helps in assessing the medial dissection, then apposition and expansion. So MAX max. So once you deploy the stent, here you are seeing that how is there any edge dissection. So next thing is what we are looking at is edge dissection and how the stent is opposed to the vessel wall and whether the stent is expanded fully. So the medial dissection. So dissection penetrates the medial layer and it is greater than 1 quadrant arc. So whenever you have these following things, then it has to be covered with the stent. Otherwise, you can have a thrombosis and it's stent thrombosis. So dissection penetrates the medial and is greater than 1 quadrant arc. Or if it is dissected so deeply, you can see here it is producing intramural hematoma, then obviously you have to do something about it. You have to cover with another stent. So place additional stent, particularly for distal dissections. So edge dissections and reference segment disease we can identify clearly. You can see here the cursor is moved and we are seeing the distal edge and the proximal edge there. The second thing is what we are seeing is apposition. Here you can see in the cross-sectional view the stent is not clearly opposed on 1 to 3 position. So if the stent struts are in contact with the artery wall, the stent is opposed. Longer than 3 millimeter and equal or more than 0.3 millimeter from the wall, then we call it as malopposition, which is significant. Then dilate with semi-compliant balloon in order to have a position better with the vessel wall. So at a low pressure, semi-compliant balloon, use it and dilate the stent so that you will have a better position. So you can see here in the longitudinal view, you see the red color. It comes red color means it is not opposed with the vessel wall. So it is not opposed. So you have to do something about it. So OCT automatically detects the malopposition, and you can see here the red color, so it is not opposed. So it is malopposition. The thing is the expansion. So the stent expansion. So if the stent is expanding the lumen, holding the lesion close to or greater than the normal reference segment, the stent is expanded. So we should be able to achieve the stent area, which should be the mean reference lumen area is 80% at least. So you will have the mean reference lumen area, and at least 80% of that you should achieve when you deploy the stent. The minimum stent area should be at least 80%. But optimal is 90%. If you have 90%, it will be good. So if you have not achieved that, then you have to, the stent is not expanded fully, so there is a chance for future events, immediate and future events. So you have to go and aggressively post-dilate and expand the stent. Here you can see fully automated expansion display. ROI automatically detects expansion automatically displayed here. So you can see here how the luminogram shows that stent is expanded where it's not expanded. So they are measuring with the lumen area. post PCI OCT is used to choose the balloon size for post dilatation in the segment of stent with under expansion. The mean EEL is 3.27. Therefore, a 3.25 balloon is should be used for post dilatation in this patient. So we got the mean EEL to EEL 3.27. So it was decided to use 3.25 balloon for post dilatation to avoid the in the under expanded segments to avoid the events. So then, of course, we have another thing called co-registration, where you can have the co-registration software also installed, so you can have a angiogram picture also along with the OCT picture, so that will enable you to have a better picture. So once minimum stent, the MSA is 6.17 millimeters and the distal reference is 5.6. Therefore, we have achieved more than the distal reference, so more than 100% fully expanded stent in this patient. So here, distal reference is 5.6, and you have achieved about 6.17. So it is more than 100%. So each OCT run serves a separate purpose. The pre-PCI run helps determine the PCI strategy, and the post-PCI runs allows the optimization of the stent deployment as needed. So that is what is called MLD and MAX, MLD max algorithm. Thank you. Over to you, sir. Robert.
That was a very exhaustive presentation from Srinivasan. I'm clearly highlighting all the benefits, how all you can use OCT, and imaging is becoming part and parcel of this thing. It's only a question of time before we start using imaging for all procedures. Karthi was very clear saying 20%, which is quite good, but I think it is going to be there. I don't know whether I told you about this, but there was a case that was posted by Mamas. He did a case. LAD result looks pretty good. Then he did an OCT, and in the OCT there was a distal edge dissection of more than 50%. So then he had to do another stent. I had only one question for him. This looks like a very straightforward lesion. Why did you go and do an imaging for this? He said he does imaging for all the cases. So there is a clear role for imaging, because you tend to miss what you see in the eyeballing. You tend to miss out quite a lot. And I think you made a very good case for different subsets. Before, after choosing your strategy, everything I think has come out very clearly. Now, Rajendran, your comments? Yeah, unmute yourself, Rajendran.
Sir, really it was exhaustive and very informative. Very good, right from the basics. Actually, after before putting a stent, choosing a landing zone, if you don't see EEL, which one will you take as a safe landing zone? If you're not clear with EEL, when the EEL is not visualized.
Srini is not there. I think Karthi, you can take the question, Karthi. I think Srini is off. I can't see Srini there.
When we are not able to do EL to EL sizing on OCT, then we have to go with lumen only. Because ultimately, in IVUS it's not a problem, but in OCT sometimes there may be a problem. So we choose lumen and upsize the stent by, that is, you size the lumen and go up by 0.25.
Take the distal.
So should we go for a larger lumen?
No. See, the idea is, you must not have an edge dissection, but also you should not undersize your stent. So in IVUS we tend to oversize. In OCT we used to undersize because we used to go with lumen. So that is why what happened is that you do EL to EL sizing, you have a almost common ground with IVUS. But if you're not able to see the EL, then you're not able to see the differentiation well, then go with lumen, but your stent size should go up by 0.25. That is, if you see lumen as 2.5, take 2.5 stent, but then make it 2.75 proximally. That is one way of doing it. Or if you're very conservative, you can even keep it exactly lumen size and then go up.
I think you have to take you have to take the.
You have to be a little loud, sir. I think if you remove your headset, you're clearer.
I think we have to go with the distal reference size and go 0.5 more for post dilatation.
The distal reference size, you have to choose lumen size, and the stent size If you because we are undersized, we go 0.25 more. Because the idea is the lumen distality of the stent. You can see actually how the transition is. If the transition is okay, if we're landing in a very healthy zone, it's okay. But when we're landing in a disease zone, then we have to be a little bit careful. Because the edge dissection, once you start oversizing the stent, becomes a problem. So the difference between OCT and IVUS when we size actually is 0.25. And in the large vessel, it's 0.5. So that is why when we do in a distality of a vessel, it's better to be conservative. Then always we can re-image and then optimize.
Actually, before this imaging started, we have been taught that we have to take the distal reference point, distal normal segment, whatever is the reference diameter, that we have to take, and go 0.5 more for post-dilatation.
No, especially when you're looking out for the distal landing zone, if there is no clear, there is a diseased area, then what will you do? I think it should be less than 50% of the plaque burden, no?
Yes, yes.
No, if you don't have a clear normal
be
zone.
An acceptable zone to land.
Yeah. Less than 50%.
If the diffusely diseased vessel, then you have to do some spot stenting kind of strategy only.
And actually, there is something in the literature also. Maybe if there is no disease-free segment is available, you can cover that entire area so that you can go to the normal-looking landing zone distally.
That is the thing. So if you are having a normal zone, normal to normal, you can cover.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes the disease is so diffuse that you have to end up doing spot stenting. The only the very bad disease, that area we stent. The remaining we just leave it and come back another day if required. Because you see intuitively it's normal to normal, but in angiographically we've seen a lot of normal to normal. But when you do imaging, what happens is we find that many zones what we consider as normal is not normal. So then we have to choose a little bit of a spot stenting if your length is going to be unreasonably long.
Yeah. There are a lot of people in the audience. Anybody who wants to ask a question can type it in your app, and the question will come directly here. So you can do that. From what we saw, sir, ISM sir, what you are saying is actually what Karthi is also saying. You reference it with the distal vessel only. The sizing is going to be distal vessel. When we didn't have imaging or whatever it was, the other point he was making was if you don't have an EL to EL in an OCT, if you don't have an EL to EL, you look at the lumen and then go up to 0.25. I think Srini clearly pointed it out in his algorithm slide. I think he had a slide in that which he said, if you have the EL to EL, go by the EL to EL, go for that size. If you can't, if you go inside, if it's a smaller vessel, go 0.25 more. If it's a larger vessel, go by 0.5 more. I think that's what Karthi was also saying. And if you're going for IVUS, I think it's for sure. Yeah, Karthi,
one more thing, sir. Actually, after doing a lot of imaging, what we come to know is that the LAD is a tapering vessel. The LCX and RCA in the AV groove are not tapering vessels. So previously we used to have the thing that we will keep the stent. For example, if you are going to stent from proximal to mid RCA, so invariably the size tends to be 3.5 proximal, the mid also to be 3.5 when you do the imaging. It may not be, because the AV groove, there is no major branch, there is no reason for the vessel to become tapering. Whereas the LAD is a tapering vessel. If you do a long run, you'll notice that after the diagonal, the taper starts. Then any small septal, there will be a tapering start. So you must know which vessel you are stenting, and also in the AV groove circumflex up before the OMs. So it's what you have to do is the segment which you are doing. If you are not having imaging, then you don't assume a tapering vessel, especially in the AV groove vessels, because that is the place where we may make an error and try to, in the distality where the stent is landing, we may undersize. We actually size to the distality, but proximal, no, it has to be the same balloon. It's not, a tapering vessel. That's what I wanted to make, especially from proximal to mid RCA up to the OM, circumflex ostium to the OM. They are not tapering vessels.
That's a very, very, very important point. I think that's very, very valid. I think Dr. Iyer also would agree that over the last 20-25 years, the way we choose the stent has also changed. Like we are using much larger stents now. Because we got the 2.5, then once we started imaging, we realized that for bigger vessels, so we started going for bigger vessels. And the post-dilatation strategy is definitely a lot more aggressive now, because you realize that what you think is good is not really opposed well, and your stent is underexpanded, and all those things have happened. And then you go ahead with an aggressive post-dilatation strategy. I think your post-dilatation is very, very important to prevent subsequent complications. Anything you want to add, sir, ISM, sir?
No, actually,
AC, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
especially in patients when you are going to do bifurcation PCI, maybe there you have to take the distal reference diameter. What, Karthik?
So bifurcation PCI is a different.
No, I'm just telling, there you always take the distal.
Always the sizing is done with distal vessel diameter
Distal
only,
vessel,
sir.
yeah.
Distal vessel diameter only. But what I'm trying to say, when you optimize the stent, just keep in mind with the LAD is a tapering vessel, and so we have to keep it little bit better. And the RCA and OM. Because
I know. Your point is clearly taken.
That is it. Always sizing is based on distal vessel diameter only.
Yeah.
What has been your experience with those tapering stents? The different size stents?
Sir, I have not used tapering stents at all. So for me, I create the taper with my post-dilatation balloon. That's all.
That stent comes in about 50, 60 millimeters.
Sir, this company which you're talking about, their specialty is making a good differentially expanding balloon. Initially, when they started making the stent, it could expand in the center and then open in the periphery. That was why it was called morphological miming the nature. Okay. Then what they did, they saw the tapering vessel and they got a balloon which would open like a frustum. So it is they have a good technology of making a balloon expand to their will. But the metal, at the end of the day, the metal has to be sculpted according to the artery and how we see it.
It just saves a little cost. It just saves a little cost.
Exactly. If they sell a tapering balloon, I've asked them many times, can you sell the tapering balloon? Because it's always mounted on this, given us this stent balloon only. I said, why don't you sell the tapering balloon? It will save us a lot of cost. But they have never perfected NC balloon with the tapering technology. It's always been the semi-compliant balloon.
Yeah, I agree with you. The only thing is, like I said, if it's a 60 millimeter, you want to reconstruct, that's going to work only in the LAD. Yeah. Like you said, clearly this tapering is going to work only on the LAD.
Yes.
A couple of those 60 mm stents, and it saves cost. And if it's a good straight vessel, it's not a very pliable vessel stent. So it doesn't go into very difficult tortuous vessels. So you have to get a very straight clean LAD. It goes in very well, stays put, and wherever you want to do a spot post dilatation, you go post dilate and come out. It makes the job a little easier, but otherwise it's not much of a fantastic stent in difficult lesions. So I think that was very, very, very good, interesting discussion on the whole thing. I think we have 2 other presentations to go. And next, I think I would like to involve ISM sir to invite Dr. Chokkalingam for his presentation. ISM sir?
Sorry. Now I invite Professor Chokkalingam, who is Professor and Head of the Department of Cardiology in Chettinadu Medical Hospital and Research Center. And he did his DNB from Cherian's Heart Foundation. And he is very popular interventional cardiologist. He has got a lot of publications to his credit, and he has got a lot of experience with angioplasties. He is going to talk on dissections, complex case presentation, his experience. May I request Dr. Chokkalingam, please?
Thank you, ISM sir, for your nice words. So, at the outset, I would like to thank Prabhakar sir and Meditrust and Abboud for giving me an opportunity to share my experience. So, Dr. Arun and Dr. Karthikeyan have set up a nice platform. So, we'll move on to other aspect of the coronary intervention. So, every interventional cardiologist has experienced routine dissections. In my small experience of 1,050 angioplasties, I've experienced a lot of routine dissections. What do I mean by routine dissection is the dissections related to the target vessel. But what I'm going to present today is slightly different. So I compiled 3 cases which I had dissections which are actually not related to the target lesion, but they were actually life-threatening, which needed further intervention. So I'm going to present 3 cases of left main dissection, LCX issue, and aorto-ostial artery dissection. First, we'll take the case number 1. So he is a 76-year-old male who himself is a known case of systemic hypertension, was undergone CABG in 1990, and he has undergone again an angioplasty in 2003. He presented to me with a chest discomfort for a few days, and the ECG showed Q in inferior leads, ST depression in lateral leads, and he was treated as ACS non-STEMI. and he was advised angiogram. For that he deferred. So later he was shifted to ward and he was medically managed. But in the ward he continued to have a severe angina, so he agreed for angiogram. So the angiogram revealed triple vessel disease, patent stents in proximal and distal RCA. The main thing was the Lima to LAD graft was totally occluded. And the native LAD showed mid 99% stenosis, which is the cause for ACS now, with a significant calcification, and the patent SVG to OM graft. So PCA was planned to LAD. Now we have a situation where the left vein is half protected. That is, the OM is protected with SVG graft, but LAD is not protected because the Lima is not there. So this is his angiogram. You can see. Sorry, it's not playing. So I'll show the videos afterwards. I'll move on to the next case so that I can. So this is a case number 2, who is a 75-year-old doctor. He was operated by our well-known cardiac surgeon, Dr. Ganesh Mani, and the patient himself is a good friend of Dr. Ganesh Mani. So he presented to me with worsening angina. Has undergone CABG with 2 grafts, Lima to LAD and a radial artery to right coronary artery. It was done on 1997. And his angiogram revealed a native TVD, 100% proximal RC occlusion, patent Lima and occluded right radial artery graft. So he was planned for PCA to RCA. So this is his RCA. I don't know why it is not running.
I think sometimes where the presentation doesn't come correct, I think you log out, restart your system. Sometimes it will start working. Restart your system.
Okay,
I think
sir.
we can ask Dr. Casey to introduce Dr. Sundar, and he can finish off his presentation. You go out and come in again. You restart your system. This happened in a.
I think he has to put that backup. Angio backup, he has to put it in that.
Now he will come back, sir. I think Casey, sir. I think you can introduce Dr. Sundar, sir. I will just give a presentation of Dr. Sundar. Let him finish his presentation in the meantime instead of wasting time. Sundar's presentation, then we can come back to him later because he's not done much of a presentation.
Dr. Sundar is a senior consultant interventional cardiologist and endovascular specialist from Kaveri Hospital, Chennai. And he's a very dynamic person and is a very good operator. And I have seen him in many conferences and presenting papers, and he has got a lot of publications. And he's going to talk to us on primary PCI in cardiogenic shock patient, unusual complication and how to manage. Dr. Sundar, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Casey, sir, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, Prabhakar, sir. Thank you, Aisam, sir. And I'll share my presentation here. This is an interesting case which was done last month. Patient, although it's not a so complex case regarding the technical issues, because it is a straightforward case, but I'll present the history. He is a 70-year-old male. He was a diabetic, hypertensive, and he was a smoker. And he had an angina, quite an interesting history. He had an angina, first episode on March 16th night. Reached a local hospital, taken an ECG, which I saw later. It was clearly showing the inferior oral MI, but reported as normal, Pantocid, and back home. And then again, the same night in the early morning, angina became severe, second episode. That is the March 17th early morning, 4 a.m. This time he had vomiting and giddiness too. And he had near syncope and went to another hospital where this patient, this time he was admitted and diagnosed as acute gastroenteritis. He was started on IV fluids and antibiotics. And 2 hours later, patient had bradycardia, and then the patient was asked to be shifted to a higher center. Then the patient landed in our hospital in emergency. Patient ECG clearly showed bradycardia of heart rate of 30 per minute. His ECG clearly showed a complete heart block, inferior wall myocardial infarction. His BP at the time of presentation was 70 almost query. And the ACS protocol was activated. He had a cardiac arrest in the emergency room itself. CPR was started. And the rhythm again came, which was again a complete heart block and high risk consent, and which was video consent. We have a very good team to be video consent was taken. My assistants were taking that, and his ABG showed severe acidosis, 2 inotropic supports, noradrenaline and dopamine of high doses. This was the initial presentation, which was taken in outside hospital, which clearly showed the inferior wall MI with complete heart block. And immediately in the cath lab, we did a temporary pacemaker via right femoral approach, and the coronary angiogram showed a triple vessel disease. A lady had 2 lesions around 80%, OM1 80%, OM2 90%, and RCA was the culprit, which was distally occluded. Here you can see with the support of temporary pacemaker, we did the angiogram. You can see the LAD, you can see 2 lesion in the proximal and in almost in the distal segment, mid to distal segment. And here comes the LCX. LCX also, you can see the OM, and there is 2 lesions, OM1 and OM2. You can see tight lesions. And here comes the culprit. Here you can see the distal RCA was occluded. This may be the reason for the complete heart block, and patient was in hypotension and the inotropic support, cardiogenic shock, everything. So at this time, nobody will be going for, will be willing to take him for surgery. So again, I thought I can open the RCA culprit vessel, whether he can be improved hemodynamically by reverting to sinus rhythm. So this is the cardiogenic shock, triple vessel disease, LV dysfunction was moderate. CHB, TPI, surgical, whether I have to decide between surgery, culprit vessel PCI or multi-vessel PCI. And so here I thought I can open up the RCA now. RCA is being a very distal vessel. I can, but it being an acute occlusion, the wire passed easily. The workhorse wire was a run through. And the difficult part is you can see the radio opaque part. It is a distal RCA. It may land up in wire perforation if I go very deeply. And fortunately, everything went on well, and this wire passed, and the balloon dilatation was done, and the artery was opened. So immediately after opening the artery, the patient became sinus. The sinus rhythm came. In between, there was an atrial fibrillation and became a sinus. And I thought I can cover the stent here. It was a Xience 2.5 into 28. The distal RCA was covered, so it was post-dilated, and the final result was good. So there was no complication, there was no distal perforation, although you can see the wire was little deep inside. And I took a check shot to particularly see the distal vessel because it was too deep inside. So after this, sinus rhythm came, the inotropes was reduced, and almost only dopamine 5 ml was going on, and the TPA was just taken out because I parked the TPA in the RA because of the fear of getting perforated and inferior wall infarction when I keep the TPA in situ. So I just wanted to pull back and kept the TPA in the RA position. Inotropes reduced, and ABG was better. Patient became conscious, and the evening well-oriented, good urine output. I wanted to specifically say the creatinine was 2 when the patient was taken in for the angiogram, and a good urine output was there, and oral feed was started, and he was taking, and he was talking nicely. The RCA was stented with 2.5 into 28. The events after this happened. So every thing after in the complications or any nightmare after the cath lab procedure. It occurs usually in the night. So we'll be always sleepless in those times. And then by 8 p.m. there was hypotension. My associate cardiologist who was in CCU who called me. Patient had a hypotension. Again, 70 query was the BP. Inotropes again started by the cardiac anesthetist. Noradrenaline, adrenaline, dopamine. 3 inotropes and which was rushed, and then the BP become 110, 60. But the patient was conscious. So I told them whether the ECG was taken. The ECG was here. So there was no acute ST elevation. The sinus, the rhythm is still sinus for this patient, and the patient had a hypotension. So I thought it should be a pericardial effusion or a tamponade, which might have caused because of the distal wire perforation, and anything might have happened. So I thought I should take an echo. By the time I ordered the echo, I just started from home, and this was the echocardiogram. You can see a huge clot which is occupying the pericardial sac, which was not there before when I took the patient for coronary angiogram. So this was a huge clot which is obstructing the cardiac chambers, so it has caused the hypotension. And this is one more view. You can see the clot, huge clot, almost occupying the and almost compressing the RA and RV. So here comes the problem. So what is the reason behind the huge clot, and what is the way of managing this huge clot? So if I leave this patient, definitely patient will collapse, and definitely it will be a very difficult situation to go and do a pericardial aspiration, pericardiocentesis, because it is a huge clot. I cannot aspirate all the clot via a pigtail or any other catheters. So I just patient. I just again called the attenders, and I just told all those things, and then I took the patient again to cath lab. So by the time I just took the view again, so there was no leakage. I thought whether there was any leakage, I should seal it. So again I took the bit so no there was no active closure of any of the vessels, so it's the same left side vessels. So here comes the pericardial tamponade because of the clot. What is the cause? Maybe a wire injury, cardiac rupture, TPA induced or CPR induced. So I don't know what is the cause, but finally the only way to get rid of this situation and save the patient is to call the cardiac surgeon. So unfortunately, I was calling repeatedly. Unfortunately, he didn't pick up, and finally, after 2 hours of trying, he picked up and he came to the scenario. So again, we planned, and this is the thing. He told we'll open subsequoid and open the pericardial cavity and to take out all the clots. Here, it is a win-win situation here because I was lucky. So all the clots were removed, and 250 ml, almost 300 ml of thing along with that blood as well as the clot came out, and immediately post-op, immediately after taking out the clot, the BP improved and increased to 160. And he put a large bore tube, and it was removed after 48 hours. 48 hours, and then the patient became stable and was discharged. So it was a subsequent incision, evacuated the clot, fairly amount to 300 ml. BP picked up off inotropes and drain removed after 48 hours. This was the echocardiogram during the discharge, during the day of discharge, and you can see there is no collection at all, and the contraction was quite good. So this is a take home will be the expect remotest complications. I can say I got good rapport with surgeon. So video consent. So everything, because the patient came in a very sick condition, and all the attendants were seeing how we resuscitated, and the patient was totally unconscious, almost dead. And then the patient the video consent was taken. Almost all the remotest possible complications were explained to the patient, and they agreed. And so there was no problem with attendance, and then we could manage and get out of this complication. Thank you very much. Any comments and teaching point, I can get it. Thank you, sir.
Ultimately, what was the cause of perforation? Wire or is it facing wire?
Still, I don't know, sir, because of the because I took specifically took a check shot whether it is an active wire-induced perforation, whether there was a leakage. I took the patient to the cath lab before shifting to the theater, so there was no active leakage. The second thing is how, if it is a wire-induced perforation, how such a huge clot has collected in the pericardial sac. I don't know still. Or if it is going to be a RV free wall rupture or even a ventricular rupture, the patient might not have survived after removing the clot. Maybe it might be tamponating the ruptured part, and if I am going to take out the clot, and patient might have deteriorated. Still, I don't know how this clot collected, and so. The surgeon was very particularly clear that if it is a clot and if it is obstructing, I'll remove the clot and I'll see whether the patient is improving. If the patient deteriorates, then it might be a free wall rupture. I will immediately open the chest and I have to repair that ventricular wall. And for that, he told whether we can take a RV and LV angiogram so that we can see whether there is any rupture or any rent in that. So I was little skeptical to do that in an unstable patient in that stage. So I told whether we'll just first remove the clot and we'll wait for the result. And if it is going to be deteriorating, we can open the chest and then we'll look around. That was the idea.
Dr. Sundar, when was the angioplasty was over? No, when
morning
was the angioplasty
over? It was morning.
No, this happened only in the night. This happened in the night.
Yes,
8 p.m.
the same night. So I just searched the literature also whether there was any reported cases like pericardial tamponade because of the clot. But all the literature was only because of the flu, only because of the blood which is causing the pericardial tamponade. Only one case report was there. There was a huge pericardial clot inside the pericardial cavity, which presented 3 weeks later because of the transmural infarct, and because of that only they have reported as a clot, but there is no evidence of
actually no, when there is any cardiac perforation, usually the clot is very rare, the acute setting. Usually only the blood collection will produce a cardiac tamponade.
Exactly.
Unless you reverse a heparin with protamine and
yes,
that has resulted, sometimes it can result in clot.
Yeah, but this patient after doing an angioplasty, he was given after 6 hours. He was maintained with an heparin of 800 units per hour for the first 6 hours also maintained. But unfortunately, I don't know how this clot came. But clearly there was no clot when I took the patient.
Very interesting, but we should find out what is the cause for the clot.
When was the temporary lead removed?
Immediately after the
procedure,
I removed the temporary lead and kept it in the RA. Because we have quite 2 or 3 cases of temporary wire-induced perforations. I still, because immediately after opening, that was a sinus rhythm. You could have seen the last chart.
Possibility that is one of the thing is one of the clots must have closed out from externally whatever was leading to the perforation, because there were clots. Obviously, your heparin strategy is a little inadequate. I think the weight adjusted, whatever. I don't know whether you check your ACT or for that.
We did
clot. So obviously the heparin strategy is inadequate. So something is there, and the clot probably saved you. The perforation also got closed. Wherever was the perforation? So ultimately, probably that is the reason why the whole thing stabilized, and you didn't have to open up. It could have been a small RV perf that could have been leaking slowly, steadily, and it clotted. ISM sir, you want to say something?
Most likely it is either wire or facing wire.
Only 2 possibilities.
These 2 possibilities. Second thing, you would have chosen a soft wire like BMW because the primary PCI. So that would have been better. Second thing, the balloon tipped pacing wires are less likely to perforate. There is another precaution one can take at the time of primary
For
pacing.
temporary pacing, right.
Temporary pacing.
I think what moral of the story is all is well that ends well. I think that we'll take it at that. I think we have one more presentation to go. And Dr. Rajendran, can you go ahead and introduce? I think he's already introduced. So Kalingam, are you ready with your presentation?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, I'll show me the videos, sir. The PowerPoint is not working, but I show the videos, sir.
That's good enough.
Yeah, I'll show the videos, sir. First, I'll take the first case, sir.
Go ahead. You can start sharing your screen.
Yeah, I'll share, sir. Yeah. I'll share the entire screen.
There's one question in the chat box, Karthik, before he goes ahead. If EEL is not seen in proximal or ostial LAD, should we select distal LM as proximal landing and how sizing? Maybe after.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, sir. Can I start, sir? Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is the first case which I was telling. He's a 76-year-old male who had a Lehmann LAD occluded and a patent SVG2OM graft. So my plan was to do the 99% of the mid-LAD lesion, which is having a severely calcified. So this is the angiogram, and if you can see here, the reason for the ACS is the mid-LAD 99% occlusion, which is heavily calcified. So my strategy is to cross this mid-LAD 99% lesion and do the stenting for that mid-LAD lesion. And you can see the routine strategy with the BMW workhorse where I was able to cross, and I did serial dilatations from mid to proximal. And while doing so, this is what happened during the procedure. So can you able to appreciate the left mid dissection? So when I was trying to introduce the distal stent, actually, it has crossed. But at the same time, I was actually deep throating the guide, which actually has caused the distal left mid dissection into a nasty dissection. Now the stent is inside and the dissection was there. So I quickly deployed the distal stent and I have to now address the left mid dissection. So what happened, this is the other view of the left mid dissection. And the patient now started having serious chest pain and there was a significant diastasis. I quickly deployed the distal stent and then I started working for the left main dissection. I took a 4 stent to address the left main. And this is one left main stenting has been done. And this is the last shot of the left main stenting. So after that, the patient has improved and I was able to stent the proximal lesion. So the original plan was to do only the stenting of the proximal and the distal LAD, but I ended up doing the left main stenting also because I slightly deep throated the guide because the stent was not going. So this caused the left main dissection and I got to address it. So next case is a doctor which I was telling, and he is actually the Lehmann LAD was patent, but his radial graft to RCA is occluded. And this is his native RCA, which was a proximal RCA, 100% occlusion. So I decided to do an RCA angioplasty because the radial artery graft is not totally visualized. Actually, it is totally occluded. It's not. There's no pathway. So this is the second shot. And I tried with the routine JR catheter, routine workhorse wire with the balloon support, BMW wire, which was not going. Then I took a filter wire with the balloon support. I was very happy because the wire has slightly moved beyond the occlusion and I was able to see the distal channel. Now the balloon was not going, so I thought it could be probably a non-cooperation from the guide. So I decided to change the guide. So I took an AL guide, and so this is the shot with the AL guide. So I removed the wire and again did the AL guide. So next shot, this is what happened. So the wire came out and the patient has started having a slight fall in blood pressure. When I took an injection, immediately it showed a significant dissection of the RCA ostium, which has extended into the aorta. And you can see the significant diastasis from the ostium of the RCA down to some portion of the ascending aorta. So now we have to seal the RCA dissection. This is again one plain fluoro, which clearly showed a significant diastasis. So there was always a saying that whenever you found a dissection, don't use more dye because it's going to extend the dissection. So I didn't take any further shots and immediately rewired. This again, I took a chance because I don't know whether I'm going to the true lumen or false lumen. But luckily, I went through the true lumen because it has gone into the main vessel. And I immediately stented the ostial RCA extending into the some portion of aorta, into the sinus. So this I was stenting the ostial RCA, and this is the last shot, which shows there is ostial RCA dissection has been covered, but the main good happy thing is there is no diastasis in the aorta. So the patient became hemodynamically stable. He was actually shifted out, and we did CT angiogram, CT aortogram actually, and this is the CT aortogram which is not showing any significant aortic dissection after that. So this patient, we decided to manage medically for the RCA 100% occlusion because he already got a stent for an ostial RCA to aorta dissection. So the third case, which I'm going to see, is a lady who came to me with ACS, and the angiogram showed a double cell disease of LCX and RCA. And I did the RCA PCI and then moved on to the LCX. LCX looked quite straightforward, and you can see mid LCX straight that OM, and I planned send from LCX to that major OM, which is 99%. So this is the first shot, and routine workouts were BMW. The LCX was stented, it was balloon dilated, and it was stented. And this is the stenting of this is the balloon dilatation. And I'll just show you. So, so this is I'm stenting the LCX to OM lesion, and this is after stenting. And after stenting, the result was good, but there was something in the proximal LCX. So that I'll show you. There was some slight haziness was there, and if you can appreciate this, there is a slight haziness was there. So initially we thought it could be a spasm because we have gone through multiple times balloons, stents and all. So I took various angle shots. I gave NTG, Nicorandil, but it was there, and you can appreciate that proximal LCX still it was hazy. So there was always a saying, whenever there is a haziness, you have to always rule out a dissection. Since there was no time for me to do an image, so I thought I could again stent that proximal LCX also. You can appreciate there is a lesion proximally which was not there initially. So the original plan was not to stent the proximal lesion, only the straight the OM. So I have to take another stent, and this time the proximal stent to the LCX was difficult to track it. But I don't know the exact reason why I was not able to track, because initial stent went on smoothly, but the second stent I was found it very difficult. But with somehow with the slight decoating of the guide, I was able to track in the stent to cover that proximal dissection. And so this is the proximal stenting, and after proximal stenting, you can see the flow is good actually. So now the haziness is gone, and the flow is also good. The distal stent flow is also good. So the patient actually complained of chest pain after the distal stent deployment, and then hemodynamically she became all right and she was shifted. So there are three dissections which are originally not in the target lesion, but which actually required further intervention. Thank you.
I think your second case, RCA,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
was a chronic total occlusion where
sir.
you gave a graft. That means that time itself it must have been blocked. So
It was
when-
actually 99%.
When you have seen the dissection, you would have just left it. Nothing would have happened because there is no antegrade flow initially also. Again, going through the wire, putting a stent, deploying the stent, again the dissection proximal into the aorta can get extended. So when already it's a CTO, when there is a dissection, best is to just leave it like that. Nothing will happen.
No, sir, it has already extended into the aorta.
Yes, by putting another stent, when you are deploying the stent, when you use the pressure, the dissection can extend. I'm not denying it has been there, but it heals. Usually it heals.
But the result was actually after stenting the proximal RCA, the dissection is completely sealed. So that is what
the dissection in the coronary is healed.
Yeah.
But the extension into the ascending aorta, we don't know.
But we did CT aortogram, sir, it was not there. So 3 days later, we did the CT aortogram. There was no evidence of dissection.
In one of our cases, it was a CTO. I don't do CTOs. I asked one of our people who are experts in CTO. He was coming and helping me. And we tried. Ultimately, there was a guide where the guiding catheter dissection. What we thought is there's no point of because it's a CTO, already RCA is totally occluded. For the timing, just better to leave it like that, it will heal. So it was just extending into the ostium of the RCA. We just left it like that. Our patient remained stable, and at the end of 3 days, we watched him for 3 days in the hospital, then we discharged him. So we are going to get him back again at the end of 6 weeks or 2 months and study and see what we can do for them.
Dr. Chokkalingam, in that left main dissection case, what was the guiding catheter you used for?
XB, sir.
XB, okay. Because XB also is a bit notorious, and you said you deep throated the guiding catheter.
Yeah, we always have a tendency to deep throat when the stent is not going. So that causes most of the problems. Actually.
A dreadful complication, but you came out nicely also.
I have a small thing about this XP catheter, sir. The thing is, Cordis makes 3 catheters. One is a traditional XP, XP LCX, and XP LAD. So what they are trying to say is that whenever we need one more thing is the conversion between XP and an EBU. EBU3 is actually XP3 is actually EBU 3.25. So it's not equal size when we try to do. So invariably when you start itself, we are on an aggressive guide, and that's the problem. And because I have had dissections, and predominantly it's because of this conversion factor. And when we try to deep throat, it becomes a problem. When you use XP, when we need 3.25, it's better to use XP3, and when we need 375, better to use XP 3.5. So I've always had this gradation. When I wanted the EBU 3.25, I use XP3. So it has just helped me in the less aggressiveness of the XP3. But if you want to use XB, then they have a version called XB LAD, which is pointing anteriorly, and the curve is much more less aggressive. So it's all available with Cordis right now.
Dr. Chokkalingam, in that other case, what you showed, the left circumflex dissection, it was almost a 90-degree takeoff, that circumflex from the left main. So when you are taking the device, a balloon, stent, and all, probably that would have created a small dissection.
There might be some flaws, sir, because of the movement
that's
of
why
the wire
initially the stent went in easily, that distal stent.
Yeah, second stent did not go at all, actually.
Yeah, that is because of this one,
Even the wire was difficult to negotiate. Luckily, I was able to cover the lesion at that point.
Luckily, I think. Nice bailout. Okay.
Yes, we presented Lima to LAD graft had failed, and there was an of mid-LAD.
Yes, sir.
Possibly the LAD graft was never working.
Never working.
Lima to LAD
yes, never working.
Graft has never been working. So in that case, maybe the lesion was not very critical at that time. And maybe you should have seen the angiogram, but probably it was not working. That's probably one big reason why this whole thing happened. No, guide catheter induced dissections. I think if you're aggressive and if you're going to deep throat, this is bound to happen. But only thing is your index of suspicion. Make sure before you remove the wire, you
Yeah, you should come out of that.
I think the moral is before you remove the wire, make sure there is no guide dissection. That's I think very, very important message that has to go. And Kasi, I had asked you for a question. It's one.
Tell me, sir. Okay, sir. I didn't get the question. Can you please repeat it, sir?
If EEL is not seen in proximal or ostial LAD, should we select distal LM as proximal landing, and how sizing?
Oh, okay. See, the problem is precise ostial stenting of the LAD is very difficult proposition. And many a time when we image, we find that either we miss or we are in the polygon of confluence. So the sizing per se, if we are going to do ostial stenting, better to, if you want to play it safe, to do a crossover. And the sizing of left main is a different ball game altogether. But what we are going to do is distality of the stent, where we are going to land in the LAD. If you get it right and then choose a stent which has got good expansile limits, then we are good to go. However, there are some times when your left main is so large that you won't have a stent which will have good expansile limits. Then only the question of how you are going to choose the stent comes. And here we don't go with proximal sizing at all. We choose your distal landing zone and choose the length. You just choose the length from your landing zone, how much you want to come. You have to come to the ostium. And then we just deploy the stent, because you choose your distal correctly, then and you size it correctly, then you land correctly in the ostium only. Use a landmark like a branch, so that your stent will land just at the branch, and your stent will, when you work back, and use a stent which is starts from the marker. Because in the currently available stents, only the Zane's group starts from the mid marker. All the other stents starts a little away from the marker, so you'll miss the ostium. So just choose a traditional ways, because sometimes imaging is not a way. Sometimes it may not help us, and we have to use our traditional ways. That's why we always go with everything. Other thing is, when you want to put a wire to the circumflex, that will give you an idea where your LAD stent has to, you have to cross the wire of the circumflex and take multiple projections. Actually, if the EM is not seen, then go with lumen, sizing wise. But then you are not going to take ostial LAD as your sizing. And if you want to play it safe, do a crossover.
Does the Scarboza work then?
Yes. If you want to do precise ostial stenting, it does work. But then, it's a very cumbersome technique, and you deform the stent, and, you have to do crimping. And so it's little dicey. And we really precise ostials, we know that the plaque extends to the polygon of confluence. It's not going to stop at the ostial LAD. So unless there is a problem in the mismatch between now I know we all know for a fact many of the 3.5 and 4 stents can go up to 5, 7, 5, 6. Only if we have a left main which is more than 6, we are in trouble. Anything less than 6 millimeters, then I think we can cross over safely. And then if you want to kiss and keep the circumflex ostium open, that's up to you. But most of the time we'll be able to enter into a circumflex without any problem. So I think when we are using imaging and it's on table, I think crossover may be much more safer option than trying to do precise ostial stenting.
Exactly. Since the question was directly on imaging, started off from imaging, you have an imaging, so I think you have all your answers there. I think, and I think that in that particular question that he is asking, he says that he can't see the EEL. Probably there is a disease there in the ostium. Probably you'll have to go to the left vein and make sure when you're doing a left vein, if you're going to do a pot, give adequate size for the pot. Don't put a very short stent and short distance into the left vein. I think that should be good. I think it was a very good discussion on all these cases. I think we started with Arun, and I think we are going to end with Arun's comment on the perforation. Arun made a comment on the perforation. The chat box says that it could be perforation of the RA, because you had kept the wire in the RA, the pacemaker wire in the RA. Sundar, your comment for that. And since the patient could have probably had an RA infarction along with the whole thing, and he was in
There was atrial fibrillation. He told there was a atrial fibrillation during the procedure. Once again says it's a RA infarction.
It was a transient atrial fibrillation that usually happens in these types of patients.
We don't know. And anybody could be right.
Yeah.
So I think it's another. Let's say it's a differential diagnosis.
Yeah, actually, I don't think it is going to be a perforation, a large perforation. Maybe a wire-induced should be, and I don't think it's a cavity perforation because the patient tolerated the procedure well. We evacuated the clot. Even the surgeon put the hand inside and evacuated everything. And then, so if at all the clot is feeling that free wall rupture or anything or RA or something, the patient might not have tolerated the procedure. Probably, I guess what Dr. Prabhakar also said, like the clot was happened because maybe a wire-induced perforation. Maybe I should have used what Dr. ISM has said because my workhorse is always run through. I should have used a BMW in this type of distal vessels. So it should be a reason, and I don't think it is a RA perforation. It should be because I saw the atrial fibrillation was very transient and became a sinus rhythm.
Can I make a statement here?
Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
RA perforation will never get closed by itself because RA has got a very thin wall.
Yes.
Yeah, very thin.
RV it can happen because RV muscle can contract and get closed. But RA is never. We have to put a patch or something.
Yeah.
It will again recur.
Yeah.
Unlikely to be RA.
Sir, can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Sure.
Actually, I personally feel that it was wire perf. There was a small ooze, and slowly, as the heparin began to wear off, then the clot started forming. And also, see, the BMW wire and run-through wire actually both are having hydro. The run-through wire is not fully hydrophilic. It has got a hydrophobic tip, so it's a safe wire. It's just that when wire went into the distality, into one of those small, which you can't even see. All these small perfs, they'll be leaking slowly. They will, even in CTOs, that's what they say. It takes usually 3 to 4 hours just for a small wire for it to cause thing. Here the blood has clotted because after they came off heparinization and everything, and this mass effect was causing more problem. And only thing is, whenever when the call comes from the CCU, and telling that they've got hypotension, they've started multiple inotropes, always tell them please start on fluids because many a times our cardiac anesthetists are very happy with inotropes and forget the fluid part. And second thing is lot of catecholamines can cause iatrogenic Takotsubo. So and it's all very much described in literature. And if your adrenaline crosses 7, then you are going to have iatrogenic Takotsubo also. So that's something always in my thing I tell them if it's inferior wall, always fluids, access site, and the echo, immediate echo. And anyway, the thing is probably the way that it has panned out with the surgeon evacuating the clot. I think should have been a ooze and which slowly clotted. I think that is how it would have got sealed by itself.
Yeah, just one comment. Actually, atrial infarction is more common in proximal RCA occlusion, not in the distal RCA. So that is also another point that atrial fibrillation is not because of atrial infarction.
And the atria has got multiple sources of blood supply.
Yeah.
Right, the discussion is just going on. I think we are also going on. I think we had a very interesting array of cases from anomalous vessels to dissections and perforations and all kinds of complications that we have had. I think it was a very interesting discussion. First of all, I think I should thank Dr. ISM, Dr. Chandrasekhar, and Dr. Rajendran for having a wonderful chair and doing it very well. And very good cases from Arun and Karthikeyan. Two friends complemented each other very well. And very good presentations from Dr. Chokalingam. And unfortunately, we had some glitch with this PowerPoint, but I think he made a very good compromise of that. I think that is how he managed all his dissections. He's able to adapt to the moment very well, and I think very good presentation. Dr. Sundar, as usual, nothing much. I've heard him quite a lot. Sundar, as usual, goes and does something and presents something exotic. And Srinivasan, I think, must have gone out after his OCT. Maybe he's gone to check some more OCTs. I think that there was a very good teaching presentation. Thank you so much, and thanks Abhat for the wonderful meeting. I think it was a very good meeting on a lockdown. I think you kept us occupied for about 2 hours. Thank you so much, and thanks to all the attendees and everybody. Thank you so much for attending, sir.
Thank you,
Prabhakar. Thank you, Abhat.
Thank you, Prabhakar, and thanks Abhat, and thanks everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Bye.